Hello and welcome to the Criminal Record podcast. My name's Ryan Carroll and I'm joined here by record crime reporter Norman Silvester. Norman, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Let's get straight into it then, Norman. Today, big news in the record. There's been calls for Police Scotland to reopen the Bible John murder investigation. So this is a story that you've got in the record this morning. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, it's an interview with Australian author Jill Bavin-Mitzi. She's a historian, a genealogist, and she published a book last year, Bible John, a New Suspect, which she identified former Glasgow printer, now deceased, John Templeton, as a potential suspect in the murders of three women, Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald and Helen Puttock, in the late 1960s in Glasgow. These were all young women, young mothers who'd been attending the Marland Ballroom and met a stranger, were taken home, and their bodies were found much later near the properties where they lived. But Jill Bavin-Mitzi believes that John Templeton is a compelling suspect. She believes he matches descriptions put out by the police at the time. The name is also significant insofar as the third victim, Helen Puttock, accompanied the stranger in a taxi home before she was murdered. Her sister was in the taxi with them before she was dropped off, and she talked about a man using the name sounding like John Templeton or Sempleson. Jill Bavin-Mitzi traced John Templeton through a sort of genealogical search and discovered subsequently that he'd been interviewed at least twice by the police about the murder, but the police had never taken their inquiries any further. So she thinks that John Templeton is a compelling suspect. She believes the key to proving if he is the man responsible for the murder of Helen Puttock and the two others is DNA. The police have a DNA contact or connection from the third victim, Helen Puttock. That was obtained in 1995 from her clothing. And she believes that if the police can match that sample to a DNA test from a relative of John Templeton, then that could prove that he is the man responsible. It was thought that John Templeton had died without leaving a blood relative. He didn't have any children. She's now, through her genealogical research, discovered a living blood relative, slightly distant, who she hopes could provide a saliva sample or DNA test, which police could then try and match to the existing sample from the clothing of Helen Puttock. And she is calling on the police to reopen the investigation, and she's willing to give the name of the blood relative to police so that they, if they so choose, could ask that person for a DNA swab.
Well, this is really interesting to think this investigation could be reopened after all that time. And, you know, we spoke to Jill. Jill spoke to the Criminal Record a couple of days ago. So let's hear what she had to say about it.
I think John Templeton's the most likely suspect. Initially, I looked at all of the suspects that police had in mind, and one of them stood out, John Irvine McInnes. There was so much evidence against him that I realised that the killer was very likely related to him. And as I went back through his genealogy, I came across the name Templeton, not a common name in Scotland. I realised that when the third victim's sister had heard the name in the dance hall, John Templeton, that she had most likely heard correctly. He had given his name. I was then able to identify 32 John Templetons who had been born within a reasonable age time period where they would have expected him to be 25 to 35 years of age. And I examined essentially the life story of each one of those. Helen Puttock's sister spent a lot of time with Bible John on the night her sister was murdered, and she heard a number of things in conversation. All of those have been accepted by police to be clues. For instance, he said, I worked in a laboratory. He said he only had one sibling, one sister. He gave a number of clues, but the biggest clue of all was that he identified a building that had been in a certain spot some 12 years before and had since been bulldozed. He recognised it as a home for children that had either been adopted out or been fostered out. That led the police to think at the time that he had been a foster child. So when I looked at John Templeton and I realised that this particular John Templeton fit many of the clues, I then went into looking at whether or not he could have been a foster child. Now, those records are closed to historians, they're closed to everybody, but what I found, what I assumed, was that every child at the time needed to have an education. It was very likely that if he had been in the Scottstown children's home, he would have gone to one of the two local schools, primary schools. I checked all of the records of those two schools and in fact identify him as having gone to Bankhead Primary School. The records there, the Education Department records, showed that he had indeed been a foster child. Then they gave me all of his, the details I needed to trace his life story. I tracked down John Templeton's wife, a woman named June. I knew that she and John had married in had met in 1967, in fact at a dance hall. When I eventually met June, I asked if it had been the Barrowland, and she said, oh, no, definitely not the Barrowland. We wouldn't go to a place of that class. They had met at the Majestic Hotel. When the first murder occurred, they were still dating. Before the second murder occurred, June and John had actually been married, which means John had moved out of the address he lived in to a different address with June, which was incredibly significant because their marriage was still holding at that time. And I realised that all of the details of the first murder put John Templeton in the Scottstown region still. But the details, certainly by the third murder, put him in a different area. He had been seen, the killer had been seen getting off a bus, which was much closer to the city. In fact, that bus stop was very close to where John and June settled. While I was doing research, I hired a private investigator, and I didn't tell June, which I probably should have done, that I would find her address and I'd find out about her. I decided to come to Scotland to interview June. So I told her I was passing by, and she said, when you get to Scotland, call in and see me. Just give me a phone call. So I phoned June, and she said, oh, I'm not feeling very well. She said, ring me next Wednesday. So I phoned next Wednesday, and she said, oh, I'm not feeling very well. Call me again. I had to leave by Friday, so I already knew her address. Now, I had never told June why I wanted to see her. I believe she had assumed I was doing family history. I moved to a cafe right next to her house, and I phoned from there. And I thought I'd just got to be honest with her and tell her the truth. So I called her and I said, I'm not doing family history. I want to know about Bible John. She said to me, here's my address. How soon can you get here? I said 2 minutes. She was very generous with her time. I was careful never at any stage to say, didn't you know? Because I think enough women have been blamed for the crimes of their husbands. That was not what I was interested in. I spent my time with June trying to find out whether there was anything that could prove to me that John Templeton was not Bible John. For instance, I wanted to know particularly whether they had gone on a honeymoon after their marriage. They had been married 2 weeks before the second murder. So had they gone on a honeymoon, he could have been well away from the area. That was not the case. They didn't go on a honeymoon. It was those kind of things. Everything I tried to check, he fit the bill. There was nothing that contradicted the thought that he was the killer. And something I never published in the book, because I wasn't sure how June would respond, but I don't think she'd mind. She was very eager that I should lay out my case. So I just told her essentially how I had come by her husband and why I thought he was Bible John. At the end of the interview, she tapped the chair next to her and she had an envelope, and she handed me an envelope with a photograph of her husband. I didn't look at it straight away. I was so nervous that it wouldn't actually look like the portrait because I still was worried. She said to me, her last words were, "I'm sorry, my husband was a killer." There are a number of survivors of these murders. The 3 women who were murdered had young children at the time. I believe they deserve answers. I believe the next generation deserve answers. It's really important that the police still value the lives of the women, who were murdered by Bible John. This is not something that just because it ages is now less important. Every woman's life is important. Every mother's life is important. And I would beg the police to reopen the case and to at least contact me. I have had no contact with the police. I would love to be contacted. I would then give them a name. I would ask them to go to meet this person and do a saliva test. I'm sure this person would not mind. And that would put an end to the mystery.
You have the name of a person a family relative who would be willing to give a saliva test?
I know the name of a person who would be willing to give a saliva test. And I think it's really important that this is done soon because the person's quite elderly. Mm-hmm. But the police have not contacted me.
What can you tell us about this person that you've tracked down? Is this someone who's in the same family tree?
This is the person that I know of is in the same family tree as John Templeton. It's not a direct descendant because, as I said, John Templeton didn't have children. But there are relatives on both sides of the family tree. If you go a little bit further back, you go sideways and you come down, there would still be enough similarity in their DNA for the police to believe that John Templeton is the killer.
Norman, some of the stuff that Jill tells us there is really quite astounding. That she's obviously spent a lot of time piecing things together. How likely is this that Police Scotland would reopen this investigation?
Well, we've spoken with Police Scotland, and their position is that no murders remain unresolved. They investigate all murders, even historical cases. They've got a homicide governance and review department to look at unsolved murders, cold cases. They say that no investigation's ever closed, particularly the investigation into the murders of Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald and Helen Puttock. And their position is if any new information was to come to hand, they would investigate it. So the position is no case is closed. All cases are reviewed from time to time, and any new information that comes is assessed and analysed and action taken as appropriate. In relation to the information from Jill, Bab and Mitzi, they've indicated that if Jill was to contact them through the normal channels, it was something that they could consider and get back to her as appropriate. It's worth mentioning, Jill mentioned there, John McInnes. Now, John McInnes was from Stonehouse, a former soldier. He was identified as a suspect when the case was revisited in 1995. And during that process, police got DNA tests from his brother and sister, which showed a similarity with a DNA sample from the clothing of Helen Puttock. And some of our readers may remember that the police got a warrant to dig up John McInnes's body and coffin, and there was further tests carried out. But the tests carried out by forensic experts on his body that had been retrieved from the grave in Stonehouse Cemetery showed there was no real convincing match to the DNA sample that had been obtained from Helen Puttock's clothing. What Jill's done is relook at that, and she obtained the name John Templeton by looking at the McInnes family tree and working on the basis that though the police may have not had the right man, may have had the right family, she was told that, DNA can pass through the generations through family trees, and that led her to believe that the suspect, or her suspect, John Templeton, that she eventually came across, would be somebody that would have a family tree relation within a family tree. And she found that connection between John McInnes and John Templeton by looking at the genealogy and various sort of family connections. It's also worth mentioning the fact that John Templeton lived in the Scotston area, was brought up in the Scotston area, where the third victim's body was found, Helen Puttock. And the aforementioned taxi ride home, the person in the taxi seemed to have a detailed knowledge of the Scotston area, as if he himself had been born or brought up in that area.
Have you ever, in your time as a crime reporter, ever seen a case like this where they could potentially find DNA from quite far down a family tree that would help to solve such a historic case?
I think this is the first case of its type. I can't recall where they've looked at a family tree. In the past, when there's been a DNA comparison, it's been with family members. It could be a brother or a sister or a mother or father or a child, or it could be DNA obtained from the person themselves, or even historically DNA maybe left at a property, or a toothbrush, from saliva or sweat. But from the best of my knowledge, I can't think of any case that's been solved using DNA obtained through a family tree as opposed to a family member.
And in your opinion, why is it taking Jill to have to put all this together? And when and she's now urging the police, why aren't the police doing sort of Jill's job there that she's spoken about, the stuff that she's been looking into?
Well, the police insist that these cases are never closed, that they're always subject to reviews. And we know that the Bible John case has had a number of reviews in recent years. I think the problem here is that it happened so many years ago. A lot of the original witnesses will probably be dead. A lot of the police officers who investigate the crime will be no longer with us. And that's going to be the challenge for police, even if they did get a match or to identify a suspect, would the suspects still be alive? And even if the suspect was still alive, who are the witnesses out there who could actually be brought to give evidence at a trial?
Well, I think Jill's insight was absolutely fascinating, and
Yeah, great.
I think it'll be really interesting to read her book. In other news in the paper today, we also had that the former drug lord Roy Dunstance is back behind bars. Tell us a wee bit about this, Norman, and what this is all about.
Well, Roy Dunstan is was a fairly high-profile drug dealer, somebody involved in organised crime at quite a high level. Take you back a bit. In 2015, he was convicted at the High Court in Glasgow and sentenced to 11 years imprisonment for orchestrating an international drugs ring from his home in Benalmádena in Spain. And basically, he had another property in the Dominican Republic, and he was, as it would appear, he was locating drugs from South America. They were being taken to the Dominican Republic, and then brought into the UK and then Scotland. And he had quite a network of drug dealers who were bringing in drugs to Scotland via these various connections. The police launched a major operation in 2013 and 2014 into Dunstan, and they discovered this incredible international drugs network that he was running from his home in the south of Spain. And they discovered during this investigation that during this period of time, 2013, 2014, something like £8 million worth of drugs, mainly heroin, had been brought into Scotland. They focused their inquiry on the Drumchapel area of Glasgow and raided a number of properties where they found, drugs, heroin, cocaine, and amphetamine. They also found firearms and arrested a number of other people further down the ladder, if you like, who were working with Dunstan's, and they also received substantial prison sentences. When Dunstan's appeared at the High Court in Glasgow in 2015, he pled guilty to the firearms and drugs offences, and he was described, or the operation that he was running at the time from the south of Spain, was described as one of the top 5% of criminal operations in the country in Scotland. So somebody there who was very much a high-ranking member of an organised crime group that which she was heading up. And it was quite a coup for the police, because no longer did they get the people further down the tree, but they also got the man at the top of the tree. And as I said earlier, Dunstan was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He got out in 2022 and moved to Loch Gilphead in Argyllshire. But he came to the attention of the police last year when they found 54 kilograms of a white powder was uncovered by Home Office officials at Heathrow Airport. Now, this was a product called Bash. It's a white powder made from caffeine and paracetamol and that is normally used to bulk out drugs. So if you're buying heroin and cocaine, you put that into the heroin and cocaine, and basically you're diluting it to increase your profits. And it was established that this 54 kilograms of Bash that he had would be enough to create £750,000 more profit on any kind of drug deal. So all the information pointed to the drugs being delivered to Dunstan's address in Loch Gilphead, and so it was. They found a lot of apparatus and paperwork that linked him in to the seizure at Heathrow Airport, and subsequently appeared in court earlier this week. He pled guilty to the offence, so he was given a reduced sentence from 5 years to 3 years and 4 months. So that's him back inside, and he'll also have to do an extra 6 months from the previous sentence. Obviously, he wouldn't have completed the last sentence, so he must be required to do an extra 6 months from the previous sentence.
And in our reports, we have that he was freed early from prison in August 2022, almost 4 years before it was due to expire. I mean, how does that look for the justice system that he's come out and, just years later, he's reoffended and back in prison?
Well, this is the way the system works. And criminals, people involved in organised crime, for whom imprisonment is a risk, an occupational hazard. The situation is that if you plead guilty to an offence, say for example the offence carries a 9 year prison sentence, if you plead at an early enough stage of the proceedings, that entitles you to up to a third of your sentence. So effectively, you could reduce a 9 year term to a 6 year term. The way the parole system works is if it's a sentence of 4 years and less, then you normally wouldn't do much more than half of that. And if it's a sentence of 4 years and more, then it's unlikely you would do more than 2/3. So a lot of criminals, now that's all to encourage people to plead guilty. And obviously there's a parole aspect to encourage people to behave well in prison. But it's a system that a lot of criminals can use to their benefit.
Just lastly, Norman, we've got updates again this week on the shootings of Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. Can you give us the latest on that, please?
Well, we've covered before in Criminal Record. You and I have covered the shocking double murder in Fuengirola on May the 31st of Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr., who were both shot dead in Monaghan's bar, Irish bar, seafront bar, promenade bar, run by Monaghan and another man. They were both shot dead. Eddie Lyons was shot dead, and then Monaghan was shot after him. We now know that a man, a 44-year-old man, Michael Riley, was arrested 2 weeks ago. He's been remanded in custody, and the Spanish police are now seeking his extradition. There'll be another hearing in October this year. By all accounts, he pleads his innocence, and Riley intends fighting that extradition. More recently, yesterday, the Spanish police have revealed that the bodies of both Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. have been released to their families back in Scotland. There's no information about funeral dates, or there's some suggestion that the two men who are both associates, both members of the Lyons organised crime group, and were close friends, known each other for many years. They might be a joint service. There's also suggestions that members of the Kinahan organised crime group might want to attend, or there may be some sort of televisation of the service to allow some people Zoom type coverage of the service to allow people from abroad to view that. So we don't really know. There could be a private service. It's not really known what is being planned, but we do know that the families have been able to get their loved ones and make funeral arrangements. Also, finally, it was interesting last week that the Chief Constable of Strathclyde Police, Joe Farrell, made a commitment to tackle organised crime, particularly those involved in the highest levels, both at home and abroad. She confirmed that the Police Scotland were assisting the Spanish police and had officers out in Spain assisting them with the investigation into the murder of Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. But she also reiterated the police position that they don't believe the double murder of Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. is linked in any way to the current ongoing violence that we've seen in Edinburgh and Glasgow as part of the wider Lyons and Daniel feud.
And how long do you think these updates are going to go on for, and what are we likely to hear next in terms of this?
Well, we know there's been 50 arrests already. That's in relation to a series of fire bombings and other attacks on properties and individuals linked to the Daniel family and associates of the Daniel family. And that is supposed to have been carried out with the assistance of the Lyons family, who provided addresses to a group said to be run and organised by a Ross McGill, a former Rangers ultra and Union Bear, who is based out in Dubai. But the police are always at pains to point out that these kind of fire attacks and other targeting assaults on Daniel family members, so it's not linked to the double murder last month in Fungarola. Suggestion is this could be completely unrelated, and it may be over some sort of drug state.
Just a coincidence, the timing.
It may be just an unfortunate coincidence. The police say they're still committed to making more arrests in relation to the more recent violence in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and I would expect to hear more details of that in the next couple of days.
Yeah. Well, thank you as always, Norman, for your insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for joining us today. And follow us next week, where we'll be updating on the latest in all these incidents and more. And yeah, thanks again for listening.
Thank you.